everyone, it's Grant and welcome back to the channel. Doing stuff a little bit differently. I have been working on my swap, but in very small increments, and I've gotten a couple of things done, and I figured while I'm running an errand real quick, I'd just go over them. The two big things I accomplished was I actually have a real air intake system finally installed on my TJ Wrangler. And the second thing I finally got done, and this has made a huge improvement just in terms of noise and heat coming into the cab, is I finally sealed the hole in the firewall with a split grommet. And that hole in my firewall has bothered me for years now, because I did that like 2.5 years ago, and it's finally been fixed and I'm really happy with it. So I'm going to quickly go to those two segments of video so you can see how I installed both of those things. I got really lucky with how close the airbox was to my upper boost hose. The other thing I realized very quickly, I was hoping to pipe the air intake straight into the turbo with those two silicone joiners, and realized very quickly that wasn't going to work, and I had to resort to using that 180-degree aluminum pipe to make everything fit. However, later in this video, I did come up with a slightly better solution. All right, let me show you the kind of tolerances I am currently dealing with. So, this is the airbox. This is a 3.5 inch to 2.5 inch silicone hose at a 90-degree angle. This one, let me get my hand out of the way. That one is 1 7/8 inches to 2 1/4. And I couldn't find any kind of aluminum pipe that went from 2 1/4 to 2.5. So what I did is I took a bit of the extra, cut it down to size, and I cut it at an angle with the thought being, because it went an angle this way and an angle this way, they would overlap and this shouldn't leak. So, but yeah, to give you an idea of tolerances, this is the upper boost hose that goes to my intake, and it's really close to the box, but it actually doesn't touch at all. And it looks a lot closer on camera than it does outside of the camera. So what I'm going to do now is put this camera on a tripod, and we are going to test to see how all this works. Today I'm going to be fixing what I personally think is one of the worst mistakes that I've made on this diesel swap build, and it's this hole I cut in the firewall. Now, the reason why I call this a mistake is I had bought split grommets that were a certain size, but when I went to go drill this hole, I didn't triple check the hole saw size, and the hole I drilled was bigger than what that split grommet was designed for, and I've kind of ignored the problem ever since. Well, I started looking the other day for new split grommets now that I am driving this rig a lot more, and the company that makes them now has a new one that is much larger. So I'm going to be moving the camera and seeing if I can install this to finally cover up this hole that I cut in my firewall years ago. So I'm going to get to work. Before I get started, let me show you how this split grommet works. This is how it comes. Splits in half. There's a groove here and an edge here. This is the top piece, so if water comes down, it will go around this. You don't want to mount it this way because then water can get in here and trickle inside your vehicle. And all this allows you to do is cut a bigger hole in your firewall so you can get the engine connectors and plugs through. But then when you have this small wiring loom, this goes around it really tightly to make it as watertight as possible. So water doesn't get in the cab, it keeps heat out, and if there were a fire, this will help prevent flames from getting inside the cab as much as possible. So with that said, I'm going to get to work. Quick update. I've marked all the holes on where I need to drill so I can install these split grommets. I went out and got the correct fasteners and a drill bit to drill all the holes. I'd like to say I could probably drill that hole and that hole without removing the brake booster. And in terms of time, I think I'm gonna try ever so slightly, but there is a chance I'm gonna have to remove this, which if I do, that's just gonna add hours to this. So with that said, I'm gonna get back to work. Well, luck was definitely on my side here because I ended up not having to remove the brake booster to drill all the holes. With all the holes drilled, then I was just using that magnet to hold the split grommet in place, and it took me a little while to realize I could just remove my door, and it made the installation way easier. Hey everyone, it's been about a week since I last worked on this whole air box and air intake setup. And this is what I had installed. It was 3.5 inch down to 2.5. I put another piece of silicone hose in there to go from 2.5 down to 2.25. It goes to 2.25 down to 1.75 inches. And one of the things I have known for a long time is you want as much volume and flow feeding your turbo as possible. And what I am going to do real quick that hurt is I found out for my turbo I could go from 1.75 inches to 2.5, which is what the size is on this silicone reducer coming off my airbox, which means I can go from a 2.25 U-bend pipe to 2.5. And it really does kind of surprise me how much more volume this pipe has. Now, I went with this pipe, even though it doesn't have a bead around it to hold on to the pipe, because of how tight this radius is. I actually ordered a different one and it had the bead on it, but the radius was wider and there was no way I was going to be able to hook it up. And I got this in and I thought I'd be able to hook it up real quick with this silicone joiner, and I realized I'd cut this too short. So I had to order the exact same thing again. So with all of that said, I am now going to move the camera, set up time lapse. I'm going to work on installing these two silicone joiners, measuring and probably cutting down this 2.5 inch aluminum 180 degree bend pipe, and see if I can't get this all hooked up tonight. It's already late, so I'm not going to be able to do a test drive tonight. So with that said, I'm going to get to work. Having done this once before made this super easy and very fast. First, I cut the silicone hoses to the correct length. The longer aluminum pipe was the real winner here because coming out of the air box was slightly higher than going into the turbo, so I was able to offset the two so everything fit really nicely. Very happy with the result. It seems to be working perfectly. I feel no leaks, and it actually sounds better. I don't really know how to describe it. I really do think I had to go to the larger diameter. It just allowed so much more volume. So with that said, we'll come back out tomorrow once it's daylight and take it for a test drive and see how it works. While I'm sure there's going to be plenty of comments on this, I did the best I could with the air filter setup. I am sure there are restrictions there, but the one thing I have noticed is I've been driving it like that now for a couple of weeks. It doesn't seem to affect my boost. My fuel economy seems about the same or slightly better even. Actually, I think it's better just because I'm not sucking in the hot air out of my engine compartment. So overall, for the space that it has to fit in, I'm very happy with it. To end this video on a high note, this is the problem that I'm trying to solve. Every now and then you'll just turn the key and the starter won't do anything. And I think the clearance is just a little too tight. But if I wait 5 minutes, it usually starts. This is what I'm fixing next.